This certainly is a good news for Chinese military, General Zhu. Why now? And we see very high-profile celebrations if you look at our reports earlier.
Actually, the profile is not high at all.
Really? Champagnes, lanterns, big ceremonies.
So we've learned it from the Western societies. So I think it's quite normal because the launch of this aircraft carrier is of watershed significance in the history of Chinese naval development. Therefore, we Chinese celebrate it. I think it's quite understandable. I don't think the profile is very high. I think it's quite normal.
Yeah, you know, sometimes China has to painstakingly trying to explain to the others about things that it just naturally actually should be done by a country. For example, like China, being one of the largest countries in the world, being the military that has to defend its own borders. Mr. Teng, what do you make of the timing of this first homemade aircraft carrier?
It's actually a long-term decided program by the Chinese government. At least 20 years ago, the Chinese government decided to develop its nuclear carrier and aircraft carrier, and also this time we learned from Liaoning, the first aircraft carrier, and now this is the first homemade, domestically developed aircraft carrier.
Is that the difference between Liaoning and the current one, aircraft carrier 001 as it's being called?
Yeah,
because earlier it was mainly purchased from Ukraine and updated it by the Chinese side, and now this is totally homemade, as I said.
Yeah, of course, for example, the newly used aircraft fighters, I think J-15B will be used for 001A aircraft carrier. And the original one is J-15. So this is a new, in design and also in high tech in every aspect. For example, the radar system also used the newly updated one.
Very interesting at the timing also. General Zhu, you don't have to apologize all the time in every answer.
No.
But rather, I want you to give us some concrete information at this point. 2 aircraft carriers from the United States likely to be in the waters of the Korean Peninsula. Earlier, there were also disputes in the South China Sea concerning territorial issues. And likely, China's military is going to expand further in the future. So what would this aircraft carrier and the timing of announcing it mean for issues imminent and for defense purposes in the near future?
Actually, the launch should have been done a couple of days ago. It is because of the tide. This time today the tide is the highest. Therefore, it's most suitable for the launch of such big ship. So this is one of the major reasons. And I think it's the time for us to launch it because it has completed about 70 to 8% of the construction. Nowadays, all those things which should have been done in the shipyard are ready.
Right.
Nowadays, they can go onto the sea and carry out the armament, and also a series of tests. So these sort of things can be done, will have to be done on the sea instead of in the shipyard.
I see.
So,
but usually, how long does it take from, let's just say, the launch, like today, until it is going to fulfill its mission?
I think 4 or 5 years.
4 or 5 years, as long as that?
Yeah, it will have to take about 2 or 3 years for the armament and also the test of a series of systems.
Right.
And then it will be put into service. After it's put into service, I think it will take another 2 or 3 years
to test
and to fly, including the flight test, landing and taking off, etc.
Yeah.
So it's a long time. I don't think it has anything to.
It's not only about the technical issue or building the aircraft carrier itself. Yeah, in fact, it is a streamlining of the whole military system.
Yeah,
the Navy has to work with the Air Forces, and all of those commanding centers have to work together in a way. Mr. Teng, What about that significance?
Yeah, this is not an aircraft carrier itself. It's a system of systems.
Yeah.
We need a lot of radar system, aircraft, fighters, and also other, fighting vessels. For example, destroyer, frigates, logistic support vessels, and also submarine. This is a very complicated, system. So we need several rounds of maritime trial for the final, commission of this aircraft carrier, because we know this is the first operation in the platform. Liaoning actually is experimental, bed for the Navy, and also do some experiment and test for the development of our aircraft carrier program. So 001A is the first operational platform, to be an aircraft carrier.
It's likely to be a test about the capability of streamlining within the Chinese military, I guess, in the next few years, when 001A is going on test missions and eventually into operation. But on the other side, you see, gentlemen, it is not only China that is building aircraft carrier. The United States, Britain, France already have many, not to mention Russia. But not only with the past record, they are also looking for newer ones.
Yeah.
Mr. Teng, I'm sure, as an American scholar on the American politics, you also know very well that the U.S. has been, they're seeing very strong advocacy about building more aircraft carriers and bigger ones and better capabilities. And now, of course, China's aircraft carrier is not even nuclear powered. It's not. And yet most of the US ones are.
Yeah.
So what do you make of the lobbying in the US of more aircraft carriers? What do you make of their desire to be sending their aircraft to be everywhere, important strategically?
The United States has been a maritime strong power for at least 200 years, and during these years, the United States has attached great importance to the control or the dominance of seas and oceans. So this is actually a long tradition for the United States to have aircraft carrier battle group in every corner of the world. And the big difference between our position of nuclear aircraft carrier is our defense policy is very different from the United States.
What do you mean?
Actually, the United States used the aircraft carrier as a stake to do the intervention in other countries' domestic affairs and in regional affairs. If you look at the recent wars waged by the United States, actually each time we could see the aircraft carrier battle group at presence. So this is a very specific, a big difference between the two countries in the using of aircraft carrier. And China only for its defense. And also China would like to carry out the assignment given by the United Nations. For example, the task force sent to Aden Bay to fight against the piracy. And also these operations, we call it operation other than war. It's not a war. For disaster relief or the humanitarian evacuation. So this is a very important platform for Chinese Navy to be a blue water Navy.
But having heard what you just said, some would argue, General Zhu, would the Chinese system of operating on an aircraft carrier and also the aircraft carrier itself be able to be ready without going through the process of a war? Because Mr. Teng, you said earlier, the United States send their aircraft carriers going to wars. Russia also, they have a very old aircraft carrier. It was also used for military purposes earlier. So General Zhu, the argument is, can China be able to do that only for peaceful purposes? Be able to take full advantage of the aircraft carriers it already has? And also make sure the aircraft carriers and the whole military system will be able to work efficiently?
Yeah, I think it's quite likely, because if you look at the future wars, I think it's impossible for the major powers to war against each other. If a war breaks out between major powers, I don't think the aircraft carriers will be very effective weapon system, because that would be the tax. let's take the war between China and the United States as a case.
Well,
If this
God
sort of
bless it,
war
would
breaks
not be
out,
in a
if
war like
that sort of war breaks out, I don't think aircraft carrier will be effective weapons.
But what about people who say, well, maybe China is trying to use the aircraft carrier towards some of the smaller countries or nations?
Actually, if China wars against the smaller countries, I don't think we need to use aircraft carriers. So the aircraft carriers can be used to protect the sea lanes of communication, and can be used to counter piracy, and it can also be used to perform those HA and DR missions, that is humanitarian assistance and disaster relief.
But Mr. Teng, you know, President Trump of the United States, during his campaign, he's very much into the idea of having much bigger and many more aircraft carriers. President Putin, together with some of those lobbying very hard in Russia, talking about having the biggest aircraft carriers in the world, could host more than 90 planes on that aircraft carrier. Of course, they have a debate internally at home because it's going to be very expensive. But the question is, aircraft carrier and the military strong enough have two purposes at least.
Yeah.
One is defense,
Yeah.
the other is deter. How is China going to juggle its tasks for the military between these two at least?
Actually, three roles played by aircraft carrier, also humanitarian assistance, not only operation, not only deterrence. This time, a lot of, disaster relief we might use the aircraft carrier, not only in China, but also in some other areas of the world. So I think China's assignment for the Navy actually has been changed a little bit in recent years. According to the white paper issued in 2015, we found that the two tasks, the first is coastal area protection, and also the protection in the high sea. So China should have, blue water navy to protect its overseas interests. For example, our economic cooperation and trade in Middle East, in Africa, in Latin America. A lot of investment. Last year, the total investment of China abroad about $100 billion. So how can we protect our interest, economic interest? And also last year, we had about 100 million people when went to abroad to have sightseeing or to just to do some business and study there. So this is actually really a task not only for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, also it's a task for our Navy. So we have to prepare such a strong Navy in the world.
What about those tasks? Defense and deterrence. How is China balancing those two tasks with its military? Now, of course, reflected by the building of the aircraft carrier.
I think in the future we will see the rapid development of aircraft carriers by different countries in the world. For example, United States, Russia, and China, and also India, and in the future, Japan may develop its own new aircraft carriers. So that's a foregone conclusion. I don't think anybody can change this
Is
trend.
that going to be an arms race? Is that what you're talking
yeah,
about?
it's a sort of arms race. But I think for the Chinese side, on the Chinese side, I think we do need it because we have such a vast area of a maritime area, and we have the biggest trade in the world. We need to protect the sea lanes of communication, and we are, as Mr. Teng said, that we are spreading. Chinese are spreading everywhere in the world. In case something urgent happen, we need to have the rescue. We will have to try our best to take them back to home, back home. So the aircraft carrier will be very, very good tool for us to do that. And also, with the development of China, I think we should perform greater missions in the framework of the United Nations, like escort operations, etc.
Right.
So
Mr.
that's a
Teng,
foregone conclusion. I think nobody can change it.
I see. What if there are different voices, and there are different voices, toward why China built its military, why China continue to build its military? Is China having specific countries in mind when building its military? What do you think, from your perspective, doing research about Chinese military, U.S.-China relations, and of course, General Zhu, from your perspective as members of the Chinese military, to those people?
For the saying by the other countries, it's quite usual in any country. If you have such a big vessel in the world, that might be some discussions. Actually, in China, before the decision made, there had been a long debate whether China should have such a fighting platform. So this is actually very usual, very common debate in China and abroad.
General Zhu, very briefly.
Actually, China's efforts on this development, I think, has been brought about by many factors. If you look at history, aircraft carrier has got a history of almost 100 years, because United Kingdom started to build the first aircraft carrier in 1917. So 100 years, and it was first put into practice in 1922. So China has just begun, and this is one. Secondly, we are facing very complicated security environment, and the third, we have such a big area to protect, and we have long lanes of communication on the sea to be protected.
Right.
We have to perform the missions in the framework of the United Nations, so we need it, and therefore we have to develop it.